The following video may contain flashing lights and illustrations that might be too graphic for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello beloved and precious people, welcome to my channel. In this video, I want us to look at the reason why Satan attacked and conquered Adam and Eve inside the Garden of Eden. In other words, what was Satan's motivation, and what was he to achieve in conquering the human race in Eden? This particular knowledge will be instrumental when we finally take a look at the fall of mankind in the Garden of Eden, as I promised you in my previous video. Now, in order to understand why Satan attacked humanity in the Garden of Eden, we will have to look at who Satan was in the beginning, and look at the things he wanted to gain by leading a rebellion in heaven, and all he lost when he eventually fell from heaven, so that we may know what he stood to gain by attacking and conquering humanity in the garden. So straight away, let's look at the early life of Satan, back when he was a good angel called Lucifer inside heaven. As it is written in the book of Ezekiel chapter 27 verse 15, "You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created, until wickedness was found in you." Now, we will look at the major events in the life of Lucifer, that ultimately led him to attack and conquer Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So buckle your seatbelts, this is going to be an exhilarating revelation, that will leave you amazed. Let us go back in time, to a time when the human race had not yet come into being, to a time when this blue jewel we call the earth, had not yet been formed. At this ancient time, only God Almighty and his family of angelic hosts existed, and they were located in the kingdom of heaven, which exists in the third heaven of the spiritual dimension of the universe. Now, in order to understand the advent of Lucifer, we have to be familiar with the angelic civilization of heaven, for he himself was an angel. Here is a short summary of the creation of the angels. After God had chosen to establish his dwelling inside the third heaven, after creating the universe, he went ahead to create the angels as the centerpiece spiritual life forms, that were to help him in establishing heaven. When God created the angels, he differentiated them into angelic princes and ordinary angels. The angelic princes were created in much smaller numbers, and they were more muscular and taller than the ordinary angels, and they had 4 wings. God created them this way, because they were to become the leaders and overseers of the angelic civilization. The ordinary angels, on the other hand, were created smaller in stature compared to the angelic princes, but they were much more numerous because they were to become the workers and subjects of the kingdom of heaven. Now, Lucifer was created as an angelic prince, and he was amongst the first angels that God ever created. God Almighty highly favored Lucifer right from his creation, for he created him more intelligent than the rest of his fellow angelic princes. After creating the angels, God went ahead to establish the administrative hierarchy and leadership structure that would apply in the running of the kingdom of heaven. In this hierarchy, the angelic princes were to be the heads of the many departments that would run the affairs of the kingdom of heaven, with many ordinary angels allocated to each department. When God was delegating the departments to the angelic princes, God highly favored Lucifer yet again, and delegated him to be the head of the worship department, which stood in the holy place of God's temple in heaven. Lucifer therefore became the angelic prince in charge of the worship department, who oversaw every matter pertaining worship in the holy place of God's temple. And to facilitate Lucifer's ministry in the holy place of God's temple, God Almighty gave Lucifer great skill and craftsmanship, in the creation, composition, and presentation of wonderful and lovely worship through music and song. Lucifer therefore became very skillful in the discharging of his duties inside the holy place of God's temple, where he would lead the ordinary angels of the worship department, to ascribe glory and honor and praise to God most holy in the most beautiful manner. As time went by, Lucifer grew to become most excellent and skillful in the offering of worship through music and song in the holy place of God's temple. He was very committed, and he would compose the most lovely and wonderful worship songs and music, that would rise up as a fragrance and pleasing aroma before God Almighty, thus pleasing God greatly. Lucifer would also skillfully organize the ordinary angels of the worship department, so that they would present worship in the most excellent and perfect way before God Almighty. With time, as this went on, God grew to be very pleased with Lucifer and his worship ministry. So God, out of his love and favor towards Lucifer's ministry, decided to honor him in the eyes of all the angels, as an appraisal for his powerful worship ministry in the temple. So God Almighty gave Lucifer great beauty and splendor, that was unequaled and unmatched amongst the angelic princes and the ordinary angels. Therefore, Lucifer became the most beautiful and splendorous morning star, in the midst of all his fellow morning stars who are angelic princes. After God's appraisal of Lucifer with great beauty and splendor because of his ministry, Lucifer still continued pleasing God greatly with his worship in the holy place of the temple, where he would stand day in day out, offering the most excellent and perfect worship to God most holy. So over time, God grew to become most pleased with Lucifer's ministry inside the temple. So in the course of time, God decided to favor and honor Lucifer again because of his beautiful worship ministry. But this time around, God, out of his favor and love for Lucifer, decided to draw Lucifer closer to himself since he was most pleased with his ministry. Therefore, before all the elect angels of God Almighty, God elevated Lucifer to become a guardian cherub, who is an angel that has 6 wings and who has admission into the most holy place of God's temple, where God sits enthroned, and who has the right of audience with God most holy. As it is written in the book of Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 13, that says, "You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God, you walked among the fiery stones." And you can imagine how Lucifer grew to be even more beautiful, after becoming a cherub, because now he had 6 wings. Now, the angels grew to greatly respect and honor Lucifer, since God had highly favored him in their eyes, giving him great and unequaled beauty and splendor, even elevating him into a cherub who is an angel that holds closest communion and proximity to God Almighty, whom all the angels worshipped.
Hi there, hope you are enjoying the video. If this is your first time to encounter this channel, I ask you to please subscribe to the channel, press the bell notification, so that you may be alerted each time we upload new videos. Also, don't forget to like, comment and share the video, so that the YouTube algorithm may recommend the video to more people. Thank you in advance.
Lucifer enjoyed this great favor and close proximity with God Almighty for many years, as he was continuing his perfect ministry in the holy place of God's temple. But in the course of time, this great favor and elevation that Lucifer had received from God Almighty, led him to become self-righteous and conceited. In his heart, Lucifer began to perceive himself as more spiritually and morally superior compared to the rest of the angels. He began to take the appraisal he received from God out of his favor, as a gauge of his own personal majesty, uniqueness, prowess, spiritual eliteness, and superiority. Lucifer therefore came down with pride and vainglory, where he saw himself as great in the sight of God, and therefore superior to the rest of the angels. Due to this, Lucifer began to look down on all his fellow angels, seeing them as inferior compared to him. As this went on, Lucifer began to use his privileged direct audience with God, as a guardian cherub, to ceaselessly and relentlessly accuse his fellow angels of wrongdoing in the ears of God Almighty. He would level all kinds of accusations against the angels, and many of them got into serious trouble with God Almighty, due to Lucifer's accusations. Due to this, the great respect and honor that Lucifer had in the midst of the brotherhood of the angels turned to fear, as many of the angels would avoid him, apprehensive of the accusations and charges that he might bring against them before God Almighty, after observing them. Lucifer therefore became a stench to the angels, and many would have breathed more easily, if he had not been in heaven. As it is written in the book of Revelation chapter 12 verse 10, that says, "For the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down." Lucifer acted this way, because he saw himself as spiritually and morally superior, due to the splendor and beauty he had, and due to his elevation into a cherub. But all this good gifts were appraisals given to him out of God's favor towards him. But Lucifer mistook them as rewards of his personal ingenuity, prowess and eliteness, forgetting that he was a creature created by God and conformed and fashioned for his pleasure. This self-righteous and spiritually elite notion that Lucifer adopted into his heart with time, was the first seed of evil in Lucifer's heart. And it rapidly sprouted in his heart, yielding the vainglory, which he bestowed on himself, and also the pride he expressed in doing so. Pride and vainglory were the first fruits of evil inside Lucifer's heart. And when pride and vainglory had fully been established inside Lucifer's heart, they gave rise to the conceit and disdain that Lucifer expressed against his fellow angels, making him to go ahead and ceaselessly accuse them and charge them with error before God's throne. This is how evil entered Lucifer's heart, and how he started manifesting it into existence through sin. And he continued manifesting evil tendencies in his dealings in heaven, while perpetually making accusations against his fellow angels, regarding purported wrongs that they had done. As sin festered on, in his behavior and dealings inside heaven, Lucifer became more evil as each new day came, up to a point where evil completely mastered his heart. When this happened, Lucifer started lusting, coveting and envying God's own authority, power and dominion inside heaven. He saw how God was receiving worship and adoration from all the angels, and how he was exalted as the Most High, sitting on the throne of the universe in heaven, and Lucifer wanted this for himself. With the depravity of the evil that now filled his heart, Lucifer could visualize a fantasy of himself seated on the throne, with the angels coming to worship him and ascribe glory and honor to him. With time, this envy and coveting of God's authority, worship and power, became an obsessive selfish ambition in Lucifer's heart, that constantly burnt in his heart, while growing in strength and intensity as each new day came. When this obsessive evil selfish ambition had completely saturated the heart of Lucifer, it yielded evil scheming, and Lucifer began scheming in his heart, how he could bring this obsessive fantasy of becoming the Most High, into a reality. After scheming and simulating this evil, using his great intelligence, the depravity of the evil inside his heart, concluded that the only way he could achieve his fantasy of becoming the Most High, is by leading an insurrection and rebellion inside heaven, by recruiting the billions of God's angels to his course. When the thoughts of Lucifer had turned to rebellion, he became completely given over and surrendered to evil. Now remember, that all the angels of God do not have free will, but are connected to God's sovereign will as their will, so that they may carry out all the desires and aspirations of God, and Lucifer was no exception. So Lucifer's will was connected to God's sovereign will, but when the thoughts of Lucifer turned to rebellion, Lucifer got disconnected from God's sovereign will as his personal will, and he became his own separate entity, that is fully established on the evil dark side, complete with his own evil twisted will. Once he had become his own separate entity with his own evil twisted will, Lucifer proceeded to lead an evil campaign of recruitment in heaven, where he went from one side of heaven to the next, inciting, agitating and antagonizing the angels against God, through malice and defamation. Many of God's angels rejected his malice and defamation, but some of them received and accepted Lucifer's malice. The angels that accepted and received Lucifer's malice, became instantly evil like he was, and they became disconnected from God's sovereign will. Now, having been severed from God's sovereign will, the fallen angels that accepted Lucifer's defamation, became reconnected to Lucifer's evil and twisted will, so that now they were compelled to carry out every thought and aspiration of Lucifer. So in this way, Lucifer managed to steal and recruit 1/3 of the hundreds of billions of God's angels inside heaven. Lucifer's stolen angels consisted of an angelic horde of tens of billions of angels, which far outnumbered God's army that is led by the angelic Prince Michael. And with this angelic horde of billions of rebellious angels, Lucifer was sure that he could overthrow God by might of arms, and become exalted as the Most High. As it is written in the book of Isaiah chapter 14 verse 13 to 14, that says, "You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God, I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain, I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, I will make myself like the Most High." Now, at this point in time, when Lucifer had stolen God's angels, the only thought and aspiration in his heart, was to overthrow God and become exalted as the Most High, who has all authority, rulership and also worship from the angelic civilization. So immediately after stealing God's angels, Lucifer and his angelic horde, started marching towards the temple of God as one man, for all the fallen angels were now connected to Lucifer's twisted will, as their sovereign will. When Lucifer and his rebellious horde of billions of angels, began marching towards the temple of God to overthrow God, God dispatched his angelic army led by the angelic Prince Michael, who is the archangel in charge of the army department of heaven. And Michael and his angels were greatly outnumbered by Lucifer and his angelic horde, but despite this, they proceeded to face them in battle. And the greatest war in the history of existence broke out inside of heaven. Michael and his angels fought against Lucifer and his angelic horde, and Lucifer and his angels fought back. But by the power of Jesus, the glorious Son of the living God, Michael and his angels managed to overpower Lucifer and his angelic horde, despite being greatly outnumbered. As it is written in the book of Revelation chapter 12 verse 7 to 9, that says, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. When Lucifer and his rebellious angels were defeated, they were thrown out of heaven, which is God's own habitation that is located in the third heaven. When Lucifer and his fallen angels had been flushed out of the third heaven, they fell into the second heaven, which was an empty spiritual wilderness of nothingness. In the aftermath of the war, when God looked back and beheld the evil perpetration of Lucifer, and how he had the bold audacity to even dare to try to overthrow him, the sovereign God, the Father of existence and the infinite source of everything, how dare he even try? God was thrown into a furious rage of burning indignation, due to Lucifer's blatant audacity to try to overthrow him. God's furious anger burnt so heavily, that the very foundations of heaven shook violently. And for the first time, the angels of God in heaven saw the other side of their Father, which they had never seen since their creation. God was extremely furious this way, because he could not understand how a creature he had created, loved and favored, even granting him unmatched beauty and splendor, and not to mention special communion with him as a guardian cherub, could turn around and repay his kindness and favor with such bitterness. To the point of stealing 1/3 of God's angels, shifting them to the evil dark side, making them infinitely evil, a state they can never come back from forever. And all this, so that Lucifer could try to attain an impossible and unrealistic evil fantasy, afforded by the evil inside him. For who can defeat God, the Father of existence? Creation itself testifies that you simply cannot even stand against him, leave alone daring to fight him. But Lucifer, following the depravity of the evil inside him, was convinced beyond reasonable doubt, that he could defeat God, just by corrupting and recruiting a few billions of angels. What madness! Note: all the angels of God have the formula of the fruit of the tree of life inside them, which not only amplifies their life into infinity, but also their nature into infinity. So all the angels that Lucifer had stolen and shifted to evil, had become infinitely evil, and this means they could never be reconciled back to God, who exists on the side of good, for they had become perfectly evil. Because of this great bitterness of depravity that Lucifer and his angels had dared to perpetrate inside heaven, the holy dwelling place of God, God in his furious anger, issued an eternal decree against Lucifer and all of his creation that will follow him, take to evil like him, behave like him, sin like him, or do anything in his spirit. God declared that for all that follow Lucifer and his ways, their wages and final destination will be destruction and eternal death in hell and the lake of fire, together with him. With this eternal decree, God Almighty condemned Lucifer and all the angels he had corrupted and anyone who would dare follow him. After the decree, God, still furious with anger, proceeded to create the entity of hell and the lake of fire, out of the material of his pure raging indignation and furious anger. Since hell and the lake of fire were created not out of God's goodness, but out of furious anger and raging indignation which are negative. The entity of hell created, materialized out with the most sadistic, hateful, ferocious and ravenous personality in all of existence. God created hell as a furnace of consuming fire, designed to store Lucifer and his angels, in a perpetual state of suffering and anguish, by continually roasting them, torturing them and destroying them, with all kinds of punishments afflicted on the bodies of Lucifer and his angels, that cause pain, suffering and anguish without a moment's rest. When the angels beheld the creation of hell and the lake of fire, and saw how the flames were raging and crackling ferociously, they trembled at the thought that they could be thrown inside there. When God had finished creating hell and the lake of fire, he cursed Lucifer and his fallen angels, and cast them inside hell. As it is written in the book of Isaiah chapter 14 verse 11 to 12, that says, "All your pomp has been brought down to the grave, along with the noise of your harps, maggots are spread out beneath you and worms cover you. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn." As Lucifer and his angels were falling into hell, they were still glorious and splendorous, but the moment their feet touched hell's floor, hell metamorphosed them, they lost their glorious bodies, which God had given them, and hell gave them hideous, grotesque and disgusting body forms. Lucifer, who had led them into the rebellion, became a hideous reptile, and his angels took up disgusting and abominable body forms, some emulating animals, others a mixture of animals and reptiles, while others became hideous shapeless blobs that could make you feel like vomiting, and others became scary creatures of the darkness that could scare you senseless. When hell had metamorphosed them into abominable hideous creatures, that emulate the evil dark side that they had shifted into after the fall. Then Lucifer became Satan, the prince of evil in all of existence, and his angels became the demons, who are the creatures of darkness that carry out every thought and intention of Satan their god. When God had finished throwing Lucifer and his angels into hell, he sealed them up inside there, and so they began their miserable existence of eternal perpetual pain, suffering and anguish, under the sadistic punishments of hell. And God and the remainder of his angels, who had rejected Lucifer's malice and defamation, rebuilt the kingdom of heaven from the afflictions of the war, and they continued flourishing and enduring in the third heaven. Now Lucifer, who had become Satan, was very furious and angry, when he saw the eternal punishment and condemnation that God had passed against him and his angels, and all who follow him and his ways. And as Satan and his demons endured perpetual and none-ending pain, suffering, destruction and anguish under the sadistic punishments of hell for millions and millions of years, his hatred for God and all who live inside heaven grew exponentially, and he and his angels would curse and blaspheme God as they were undergoing torture and unbelievable suffering inside hell. Satan desperately wanted to avenge himself on God, for having cursed and condemned him and his followers eternally to the furnace of destruction, but he could not do anything, for he did not have power to defeat God. So his mind turned to fantasy. As his body underwent torture in hell, Satan could imagine himself taking vengeance on God and all those who live in heaven for the pain and suffering he was going through. This intent and ambition of taking vengeance against God turned to become an obsessive evil ambition of Satan, just as the ambition of becoming the Most High had been, while he was yet an angel in heaven. Satan therefore became obsessed with the prospect of revenge. With time, Satan devised a way in which he could project himself from hell by his spirit, through his secret dark arts, and spy on God and his angels in heaven, all this as he was looking for a way to exact vengeance on God Almighty. He was able to project himself from hell this way, by using the combined power of himself and the billions of his fallen angels. For remember, that the power that Satan and the demons had, while they were still angels, had not disappeared, after the curse, but it had only shifted sides, becoming the authority and power of darkness. And this combined power of the fallen angels was available to Satan to employ and manipulate in hell, for Satan is the prince of evil in all existence. So Satan could project himself from hell by his spirit, using the combined powers of the fallen angels, all the while as his body remained in hell undergoing torture and punishment. And he would go out into the second heaven and roam outside hell by his spirit, all the while spying on God, and looking for an avenue to exact vengeance against God. But he could not find any avenue, because God and his angels were firmly established in all goodness. This spiritual roaming of Satan outside hell by his spirit, using his secret dark arts, continued, and when God finally proceeded to establish his plan, for the physical portion of the universe, by creating the earth and all living creatures inside it, the enemy was still spying on him, and he was seeing everything that God was doing on earth, while still looking for an opportunity to avenge himself on God. Now, when Satan saw that God had created the human race as the centerpiece physical life form, that he would use to establish his dominion and rulership over the physical creation on earth, and when Satan saw that God had committed into the hands of mankind all authority, power and dominion over the entire earth and all that lives in it, Satan saw the human race as his second chance at obtaining authority, rulership, power and worship. But most importantly, he saw humanity as his tool of exacting vengeance against God, for condemning him and his angels. For Satan knew that he had no power to overrule the eternal condemnation that God had decreed against him and his angels, so he was willing to settle on the next big thing, which was to obtain rulership, power and authority momentarily through the human race, and in the process take vengeance against God by ruthlessly destroying human beings who are in the image of God, through sin, wickedness and evil. Thus making human beings the subjects of the same decree that God had used to condemn him and his demons to hell and the lake of fire. In this frame of thought, Satan would exact his vengeance against God, by condemning God's precious humanity, whom God had created in his image and likeness, to the same eternal hell and lake of fire, that God had built for him and the demons. So the main agenda that led Satan to attack humanity in the Garden of Eden was vengeance, where Satan wanted to get back at God, using the human race as pawns, whom he would ferociously and sadistically destroy through sin and evil, making them share in the final destination that God had set for him and his demons. But Satan also wanted to steal humanity as he had stolen the angels, and use them to establish for himself a kingdom and dominion through which he could exact power and obtain worship. For remember, while inside heaven, Lucifer wanted to be exalted and seated as the Most High, so that he could exact authority and power over the angelic civilization, and in the process obtain worship and adoration from the angels in heaven. But he failed to achieve this, but instead lost everything, when he was flushed out of heaven. So Satan saw humanity as a substitute civilization, that would give him all he had wanted while inside heaven, but now on the earth. And since God had committed into the hands of humanity all dominion, authority, and power over the entire earth, Satan reasoned that he could steal from humanity all this power, authority, and rulership over the entire earth, by shifting them into the evil dark side, just as he had done with the fallen angels. So by conquering humanity in the Garden of Eden, Satan would manage to hit two birds with one stone, thus fulfilling the two obsessive ambitions that drive his agenda, which is the ambition for power, authority, and rulership, and also the ambition of exacting vengeance against God for condemning him. So as God was establishing humanity on the earth, Satan was spying on humanity by his spirit, looking for the opportunity to attack and conquer them, so that through them he may get to take revenge on God for condemning him, and also obtain a civilization, over whom Satan can exact his power, authority, and rulership, while obtaining worship in the process. Now, when God placed the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the Garden of Eden, and issued a command that Adam and Eve were not to eat of that fruit, else they die. Satan took this command by God, as the opportunity he had been waiting for, to go into the garden by his spirit, and through his cunning conquer humanity, by enticing them to disobey God's command, which is a sin. And by doing this, he would effectively steal human beings away from God's hand, by shifting them into the evil dark side, as he had done with the billions of God's angels inside heaven. Thanks for watching this video. In the next video, I will be looking at the actual fall of mankind, and how Satan executed this conquest of mankind in the Garden of Eden. Shalom. Maranatha.